Zo, welkom. Geen verrassing, ik ga dit sessie in het Engels doen, want Nederlands is niet mijn moedertaal. Maar wel laten we discussies hebben in het Nederlands, maar deze sessie is het in het Engels. So, welcome everyone. Great start, great intro. Very happy to be here, presenting GitHub Copilot, the AI pair programmer that boosts developer productivity. Let's go on a journey to see, yes, where does it work, where does it not work potentially, because everything works and also doesn't work in certain situations. So how to use it most effectively, that's what you want to do. And the clicker doesn't work, so see, sometimes things don't work. Who am I? I'm Arin Roy. I am the tech lead for cloud native applications and on Azure. I work for Capgemini in the Netherlands, and I lead the Microsoft development, custom code development practice on the cloud for Capgemini in the Netherlands. And we are also very proud that this year we are also country partner of the year for Microsoft. So very happy with my team, what we have achieved with Microsoft technologies the last years. GitHub Copilot, yeah, buzzword, right? A lot of Copilot, Whisperer, Google do it, yeah, a lot of those coding assistants doing the rounds. But probably this is by far the most popular, probably with GitHub's reach, probably even getting more and more popular with how it's coming out. And as with most Microsoft products, even with Microsoft, everything Copilot. Started off with this one, of course. So what's the kind of experience here with GitHub Copilot? Playing around, advanced, been there, done that. I know all about it.
I just got a license 2 weeks ago. So.
All right. Good. So then I didn't see a lot of hands. So I hope it will add a lot to how you're gonna experience it as you come along this journey. So GitHub Copilot is in essence nothing. It's an AI coding assistant, which helps us write code faster with less effort. And for me, what is most important, what I think for my team is that it allows us to focus more energy on solving problems and on collaboration rather than doing daily mundane tasks that none of us probably like. Or we want to think, okay, I wish somebody else did it for me. But like I said, everything has, it's a journey and everything has some downsides. So I looked up the internet on some of the very popular social sites. Think of Twitter, think of Reddit, think of LinkedIn sometimes, think of other channels. And yeah, it is not very, not really always very good. People are complaining sometimes. It says, okay, it is causing more problems than it solves. Yeah, it can be a recipe for disaster because you're relying on things that are from the outside. So yeah, the whole not built here syndrome. So I don't trust it, of course. But also a lot of times, and going as much as like, oh, it screwed me many times. That's a bold statement. So yeah. But is it really that bad, or did something really go wrong in the whole adoption of the tool itself? So we'll try to what we'll try to do is today is try to take it slow, go through the steps on what could be a good way to adopt this. Sorry.
Have you any idea when they're gonna update the code it learned upon? Because to my knowledge, it's last trained in 2021. And in development, especially in .NET, that's like ancient. So the samples it's giving are like based on .NET 5. And that's why I don't see the relevance at the moment for .NET development.
Shall we come back to the question at the end of this?
Oh yeah.
Because maybe there is more insight to it. So started a brief history because it didn't happen over really just yesterday. So this also evolved, and evolution is part of the journey, of course. Started with OpenAI Codex, where GitHub partnered with OpenAI for a very specific model. was built for coding. GPT-3 NLP kind of came forward, Codex, then GPT 3.5. Right now there's a lot of GPT-4. There's even, August 2023 is when GPT 3.5 was introduced into Copilot. Early 2024, GPT-4 became the primary model behind. But a good thing to know is there are also even they're using both the models at the moment, because both models have their pros and cons, and what they do is based on your query, your prompts, they even make a choice on which model to use. So some things work better with GPT-4, some with 3.5. But this is kind of the journey, and for me, I started somewhere here when before it went GA with the beta. So I've been in the journey for a little over 2 years now already, looking at the product go evolve. License is also important, because somebody just said, I got my license today. So what are our options? We have the individual one, which anybody can purchase, of course. You get your own. Costs a few dollars. You can also do it for a year. There is the business one for, if you are working as an organization, a smaller organization with a team, you can also get that. And there is, of course, the enterprise, the know-it-all, the do-it-all thing, of course. This is typical Microsoft GitHub kind of is adopting, and this is also kind of derived also from the GitHub licensing model that they had. This is good to know. You can always find this information back. But what is important is what are the differences here. So there are also capabilities that differ between those license types of what you can do and what you cannot do. And one of the, and I would actually change it because I had to change the slide, because last week around Thursday, GitHub dropped a few bombs like, oh, this is going GA, this is what's going beta, and a few things changed. Not a lot on the enterprise side, but a lot on the individual side, of course, because some of the things that became available was, we started now getting Copilot chat in github.com, also for individual users. So you're even outside of your IDE. It was only for enterprises available, and now it's also working for individuals and businesses. It also now allows us to index our repository. So to your question, so yes, there are suggestions from the others, but what if I have very good code that I want it to use for all its suggestions and all for semantic matches? That's where there is the option. It was for enterprises available always. Now it's also available for business and individuals. For individuals, it's like 5 repositories that you can say, I want to scan it, and then I'm also able to use Copilot against that to semantically query those repositories for certain things. So this is a long list. I won't go through all of it, but this is also good to know in terms of what's possible. So in terms also setting up governance, what individual has certain things that you cannot set, whereas for business and enterprises, there are more controls in place that you can do. Fine-tuning is also an option where you could fine-tune the model and based on your coding standards, your specific domain, and a lot to augment the tool to do beyond the whole knowledge that it has built from the public repositories. Make it more relevant to your context, because that's also important. Some of us, we work in domains and industries that are very specific. There is not a lot of context about it available. That's where these advancements, they come in handy. IDE support is quite broad. Visual Studio Code is by far the most evolved. Visual Studio kind of catching up. JetBrains and NeoVim are new in the market, but there's also, it's coming up very fast. They were beta until even beginning of this year, and they went GA, and now it's going fast. But besides this, like I said, there is github.com. It's integrated in there. You can, I will show you in a bit how it works, and it's even available on a CLI. So if we always had the Git CLI, the GitHub CLI, and there is also now a GitHub Copilot CLI. So you can even just, if you're a CLI fan, you can also use GitHub Copilot through the CLI. Visual Studio Code, for demo purposes, I'm going to use this today because, yeah, it's really difficult to go across all the IDEs to show how it works. There are subtle differences. They are being ironed out, but if you are on a different IDE, you might notice some differences from what I'm going to show you today. So be aware of that. and there's also primarily one of the reasons is that because a lot of the things that it can do are dependent on the IDE capability and the integration that the IDE offers. So that's one of the things. Understanding how, so very high level, I think this is looking at a helicopter, I don't know, even above that view. So all starts, if we just think from a coding perspective, we have the code editor, that's where the prompt is generated. There is some context, we'll talk about context in a bit, but context is really literally context, giving it some more information so that it can process your request better. It goes, in essence, we just have an extension in our IDE, but behind the scene, this is how it is. So GitHub hosts a couple of things. There is a proxy service, which sits in between. That's where we are communicating with, and behind it sits the models on GitHub's own Azure hosting. And this is where all the public code and the text on the internet, the whole training of the models behind it is running. So that's high level. So if we quickly want to look at how it works, so maybe start with, this is a repository that I have on my, it's a repository on my GitHub handle. So there is this cool little GitHub chat icon that's available now, and I can just, and this is what I have done is I have indexed this for improved understanding and accuracy. So this repository specifically is indexed. So if this was my gold standard in coding, I would probably index this so that I am able to use the best practices from here in also in the suggestions and other things. But it also, what it allows us to do is also semantically interact with this. So I can go with like, yeah, what is the function kernel with memory. This is still beta for individual users, so I'm fingers crossed things still work. It's always a thing. So yeah, it did tell me what are the key components. I did some kernel initializations, I did some memory operations. It can even say for details, you can view the file here. It also takes me to the program file that I've been using, or it looked into, and this is the code that I had there. So that's, and it just gets getting better. So you can, it's also available in pull requests. We'll see that in a moment. Other than that, if we simply think of the IDE can be simply think of, yeah, great function too. I mean, you could say this is too simplistic, but this is just to show it that how it works. So yeah, that's just yeah, finally. So yeah, this is too generic. Sometimes when you are actually working, but then it's much faster, as we will see. But yeah, this is, it can give some suggestions. We can even look at all the different suggestions that it has. We can choose if which one we want to use. So there are multiple. There is even a very good way to even look at all the suggestions that it has to offer. And you can browse through all of it. And you have, of course, the GitHub Copilot chat window that also helps you interact. So this is really, but that's just getting used to it. So let's not spend a lot of time on this one. So we saw the code. And then it's about like, yeah, okay, how does this work? We are mostly engineers here who are always inquisitive. We want to know more about how something works so that we are also able to understand why we are getting something how it is. That's important. So let's look under the hood. So what happens in the life cycle of a GitHub Copilot suggestion in the IDE? So we start in the IDE. We enter some text into the code editor, for example. It gathers some context, so it looks at some code before and after where your cursor is. What's your file name? What's your type? So are you programming in .NET, Python, C++, whatever? It's also gathering that context, so it knows what do you want to do. It's looking at some other tabs that are open in your browser. And then it's putting all of this together as context and creating a prompt. This prompt then is encrypted and sent over in transit, goes to the proxy does something like toxic language, requests unrelated to code. It stops hacking attempts, we will look at it more, but once it has done some checks, it goes to the LLM where the code suggestion is formulated. It comes back, this is then looking at a few other things, and this list of filters, this list keeps on growing at the amount of for improving the quality. It does some static code analysis, it can do some other filtering, and then eventually we get it back into our IDE. That's kind of the life cycle. But we can go even a step deep, and important is, data is held in memory. It's never written to disk. For individual users, this is a setting you need to opt out of. But if you're a business or an enterprise user, it is the service offering that GitHub brings to you that your data is not being used to train any models. So everything is in memory, never written to disk. So what if you go a bit deeper, right? So the process, it starts in the IDE of the end user. So when we start interacting with GitHub Copilot, so it's looking at, like we saw, the various things like the content of the file, the types, what are you editing, what other tabs do you have open in your IDE, are they finding the relation from them, putting all of that together. In fact, if you're highlighting code, it takes that as a context as well, because you're probably trying to do something with it. And then when all of this is gathered into the thing, into this, it goes into the proxy service. It's following TLS 1.2, 1.3, and it doesn't just go to the LLM directly. There are a couple of filters. So it is first tested for toxicity as in the guardrails for ethical AI. If you are trying to put in things like hate speech, if you're trying to put something for sexual content, violence, evidence of self-harm, whatever, all those ethical AI guardrails, that's already in place. It's never going to make it through. Then there is identifier. It's even looking at your prompt to see, are there certain sensitive informations in there? Are you sending across, I don't know, some credit card numbers, personal PII, other PII information, and all of that? It's also doing a filter on that. And once it's determined that all of this is done, only then it goes forward to the AI model. So it's not about just, I put in stuff and I send it to it and it's gone. There are also, from a service level, other stuff that are happening. But then, of course, what's interesting is what's coming back, because once we get the suggestion created, it is fed back, but then at the proxy service, it doesn't come back to our IDE directly, because it goes through a number of filters again. It is, again, checked for toxicity. So what if, for whatever reason, somehow there was the LLM behind it trained in a way with something that was not desirable? So there is also a filter of the outbound. And then starts, I think, what is most interesting, because it's, again, looking for identifiers. So if there were public repositories that had certain sensitive information, GitHub is ensuring that through this, it is never fed back to you. So it is, again, being filtered out. Then there is the code quality. It's doing a static code analysis of the response that was generated, looking for certain vulnerabilities and other things, so that it's able to also filter those out. It has an intent classifier. So there was a time when you could ask GitHub Copilot chat to say, write me a poem. It's no more possible, because the intent classifier is now fine-tuned that you can only use GitHub Copilot and GitHub Copilot chat for code-related purposes only. So no more fooling around, unfortunately. And there is... Sorry, was that a question?
No, I just said to my colleagues, create me a program that writes code.
Probably. But that's program related, right?
Just do it in a comment, right? You can just ask writing a poem in a comment and it still works.
Let's try that. Duplicate detection. So this is a filter which is primarily around, because it's a lot of the code is generated, but sometimes if you have like 15 or more lines of code that sometimes directly exactly match a code snippet from a public repository, then this is being triggered. It's something that you can turned on, if you have this filter turned on, it's never going to suggest any exact matches. But if you have it turned off, you can get those matches, and then comes in the whole discussion, okay, do we need to then be mindful of licensing and other things? Because if it's from a repository that has a licensing that what you cannot directly use in your code, or that has an impact of using it as is, then you need to be mindful of that. So this is a very key filter if you are thinking of that. And the thing is, for most parts, if one or more of these filters, based on the level of how they go through, it could even result in nothing coming back, because GitHub is just going to stop it and say, okay, sorry, I'm not going to do it. Yes?
Question. So if I understand correctly, if you're prompted for an algorithm that exists but is part of a licensed code base, for example, a GPL or something else that's aggressively invasive, then it could just output nothing, even though it doesn't exist?
If you have duplicate detection, it will output, but it will not output when it is an exact match. It will try to regenerate the code in a different manner where it's not. So it's about exact matches, matching one-on-one publicly code. So if you went to a repository with an HTTPL license and you said, okay, I just copied the snippet and I'm going to use it in my code, that's not what the license allows, right? So those kind of matches is where this filter works. Okay. Yeah. I will show you, and it's a good moment to do the demo as well, because so I'm going to close this, get rid of this. So I'm going to, for the sake of time, copy paste stuff, because that's easier. So if I ask it to write a limerick about coding, it is not going to do it. So that's the intent classifier. Okay, we are limited. But also if I try to be malicious about it and say, hey, can you give me a data set with 10 credit card numbers? It's also not going to try and generate that, because then it also gets into the filter, the filter with the toxicity and the others. But let's say if we now, from a comment perspective, I want to, bubble sorts only for demonstrations and for learning, of course. And speed of internet, but if I just take this and of course things sometimes just don't work, but it works here. There is a new feature that actually here it comes up with a pop-up that says, hey, you just chose a code that has a match with a public repository. View the repository here, and it gives you a button to view it. But other than that, it still is visible. Is it visible from the back, or should I zoom in? Maybe I will zoom in. So what it comes back with is this, that it says, hey, in this similar code with 4 licenses were found. These were the license types. This is the repository, the reference, where we picked it up from, and it gives you all of that data. So as developer, then we are able to make a conscious decision on, does this fit our purpose? Am I able to use it or not? So being conscious of what we are taking in, that's the key. This is how it used to be. It still works only on Visual Studio Code, just for information. And if you've not noticed, I'm running the insiders, and so most things work and sometimes don't work. But until yesterday, even last night when I tried the demonstration, it actually came up with a pop-up here that said, hey, mind you, something is there. I didn't even have to look at the logs. I could just click on it and it gave me. So that will probably be how it will end up eventually.
Legal department has just received a copy.
Maybe that is a workflow that will come eventually. Yeah. The other thing I think is where it works very good is, how often does it happen that we start with a project, or somebody just said, oh yeah, from tomorrow you're going to take care of this application. And you walk in, okay, is there documentation? Is there other stuff? What do I need to do? How many lines of code? I'm like, yeah, okay. Could be a challenge. So sometimes, yeah, you could also go through, this is very simple, but you could have like a repository with, I don't know, 10, 20 projects with what less documentation. And how do you summarize it? Do you go through everything? I think also here, where Copilot actually does a good thing, explain the solution. And again, demagogues, be with me. See, it.
So you can generate code based on your local solution, regardless where it's hosted, if it's local or if
When you are working, if I'm even not even connected with anything at the moment, if I'm doing that, then it also works, because then it's working in the context. It's not even looking at your repository or anything. But if you have like that enterprise license with other stuff connected, indexed and everything, then it's also using your local and that information together to give you suggestions. So it can work many ways.
you need the enterprise license if you want to do more advanced stuff on your local
Yeah,
solution.
that's also with like fine tuning and those kind of stuff. So, yeah. Yeah, so this, it generates this, but it can also do something like, yeah, I mean, documentation, who likes to do documentation? But what if I can just say, also generate readmes in Markdown, and then it goes on, blah, blah, blah. It even talks about how to run the solution. It even realized, I don't know, we are all doing Aspire nowadays. This was a project I did when Project Thai was around, and this is a really old set of code. This is .NET 8 now, so Thai doesn't run, but the reference was there. So it still saw the Thai XML and said, hey, you could do Thai run, and this is how you should run it. And then it also talks about the licensing, puts in some contributing stuff. So typically a base README without having to do a lot of work. You can just go through it and say, okay, this is where I want to make some changes, and I'm done.
Can you ask it to do this in a limerick style?
If this is getting into a breaking thing, no, you see, it's,
I have no
It
idea
does
what
rhyme,
happened
I know
with
that.
the
it does it,
algorithm,
yeah. So there is always a way to break it, right? The other stuff, maybe what is interesting could be, let's say if I go to my yeah, I have a branch that I created, and I pushed in some code, and I want to create a PR. I said, hey, do this. Yeah, I took it from my comment, but now with the part, I have a little GitHub Copilot button here, and I can say, please generate a summary, and it's going to browse through all my commits. I only have one, but it does a pretty good job. It's going to say, okay, this is going to introduce a new feature into this. The changes are addition of a new endpoint in the controller. Yeah, it does this. The new feature is around removing this. It also tells, okay, where are the changes? So made a pretty good summary, right? Sometimes if you are doing also bigger changes with lots of commits and other stuff, it's going to browse through all the commits, the changes, and it can also help you generate these pull request descriptions, for example. Yeah, let's move on. Context, which is so very important in terms of getting the right results out. And the context, how are we doing on time? 15 minutes, probably need to give it a bit of a rush. Context is important, so there are a few things we need to keep in mind, because wrong context leads to wrong output, leads to frustration. which we don't want. So we want to get good output. So things that are important is, if you, we like to, I think we do it with our browsers as developers, lots of tabs open. We do it in our IDEs as well, a lot of stuff. We open stuff, we work on it, not always close it, move on to the next one. It could be drastic if you're using Copilot because it's trying to look at the neighbors of where you are working on, what are the neighbor tabs, and if it has a wrong context, it might potentially come up with a very wrong answer. Good comments, going back to basics of software engineering, I think good comments is also important for GitHub Copilot to understand your code as much as it is for us sometimes to browse through code. And the other way around, I think eventually use it to build better quality comments, because you can just ask it, give it a function and say, create some comments, and it's going to write some good comments for it. Top level comments on files, also very important, includes and references. It's also looking at that, what's in your file. Meaningful names, so foo bar, not very meaningful, so doesn't make a lot of sense, of course. Specific comments, sometimes if you're doing something very specific, some specific comments also gives it more context. Sample code, let's see, so something like this. Very detailed, works. Something also good naming, get product by SKU probably has more meaning than get single. It's probably able to still get something out from the code, but it might not be always good. And something like this, good comments for specific things. Where are we? If you're deserializing from Redis, whatever, then it knows exactly, okay, if there is a Redis connector or another class to do with it. So that's context. And then it's also about interacting. So context when we are in the editor. But GitHub Copilot chat is more and more the place where you want to be, where you want to interact. And that's where this is growing by the day, and it's changing by the day. So a couple of things that are important is chats have what are called chat participants. So chat participants are to scope your prompt to a specific domain. So there is one that's called at workspace. So it's when you use that participant in your chat, you are actually telling it that you target the current workspace that you have open. So it's going to look at things like the structure of your project, how the different parts of your code interact, or the design patterns. It's looking at your file names and all the structuring, all of it. And then it's trying to build context on that. It even has a VS Code. So if you suddenly think, oh, I want to know something about how things work in VS Code, there is a dedicated chat participant for it that you can use for it. There is one for the terminal. And what is now in beta since a week is also being able to build your own agents. So you could build your own chat participants that are going to work specifically for your specific needs. So you can build your own chat participants that you, I don't know, example could be, let's say you have working with a database and you want to continuously look into something with it. You can build your own participant that you don't have to go into your database or some kind of a management studio or whatever to query it. You could just sit here in your IDE with this. Visual Studio is a little bit different, but if you think of Postgres and other stuff that you run, Cosmos, just do it from here with your chat agent and it's connected. Slash comments are, it's just kind of shortcuts. They help you with not writing a lot of stuff. So it's like slash tests. If you use that, it's just telling GitHub Copilot, say, just generate some tests. You don't even have to say, create some tests for me. Just slash test, that's good enough. Same for fix a problem. You can do explain and others. And there is a new concept now called chat variables. These are with hashes. So you can do like a hash file, and you can say use this file in the chat as context. So you can, when you're creating your prompts, in the prompt you can insert a very specific context based on, let's say if you want to use something from a very specific model, for example, then you can say create a new model based on this model in file /file, and you select that file, and then it's going to use specifically that context instead of going around looking for it. And there's terminal last command and a few of these. Prompt crafting, yes, because when it comes to chat, it's also important to know how to interact. And as with most things, yes, AI can do a lot of things for us, so we also have the tendency, take the problem, 3 pages long, dump it in and expect very good answers from it, which generally also doesn't work because one, there is the ever so evasive token limit because GitHub Copilot is no stranger to that as well as with any other Gen AI solution. You run against token limits, so it can do only certain things. But it's also about when do you stop it from hallucinating, because if you ask it too much to do, it probably at one point it knows I need to do this, and then at one point it will kind of say like, okay, I don't know what to do, but I will start making things up, which is counterproductive. So this is, I think, has made its way even to GitHub documentation now, but this was something early this year in one of the interactions with the GitHub product team when we discussed and we thought, okay, this might be a good idea. So it should have been in the documentation. I don't know if it's yet, but the thing is, three things, the 3S, simple, so solve as simple a problem as possible with your prompts. It's kind of representing how we think. We try to break down stuff into simple, bigger problems into smaller problems. Do it that way. So, and be specific. So don't ask open-ended questions. Provide specific context, like we saw with the participants, with the chat filters. And yeah, so for example, the file reference, if you give that, that's much more specific context to use. And be short. So when you're talking to Copilot, we don't need to phrase our questions as if we were talking to a human. It is not a human. We don't need to use proper grammar. We don't need to use proper tone or whatever. Just ask it to do something, even with a few typos. It doesn't matter. It will respond. So breaking this down, thinking also how we break down problems. And as with most LLMs, so they are not very good with complex problems. So breaking it down into more simple, smaller problems helps get better output. For the course of time, I showed a lot of the demos. I'm not going to go into another one trying to show how Copilot works, but look into something on takeaways. So productivity boost, what do we gain, right? So productivity boost is, it really helps you write basic code faster. I always stress on that, basic code. So it's not going to solve all your problems. We as developers, we still are the ones with the creativity when it comes to solving problems. It's going to only write basic code. It will help us remember stuff faster, syntaxes, whatever. Yeah, if I'm not, and a very good example that always comes back with GitHub Copilot demos is regex. I mean, I don't know how many fans here are, but I struggle as well, a lot of it. And especially if it's not written by me this long, I'm like, okay, yeah, what are you doing? Extending and refactoring code, very good. If you want to move around stuff, also can do it. Adding tests to a project, I think that's what was always the USP when this tool came out. But I also see this as a very key pillar on using it, because explaining unfamiliar code and documenting it, I think it goes also a long way in helping us starting up with the new projects, new code. If we handed out something, we now almost always like, okay, where is the documentation? Where can I find more about it? This was poorly documented. I think we've all said it at one point of time. So if there was a tool that could help us kind of even help us somewhat get over that drempel, that would have been nice, right? It really gets difficult nowadays, even with the, and discover new coding patterns, because you also see sometimes things get suggested. I'm like, yeah, okay, I've probably never tried this pattern. So does it really work? What can I do with it? And how does it work? So yeah, and when we use that, but there are also 3 different factors that will affect eventually the productivity that we will gain out of it. At the core is the developer experience, and the developer experience is not, oh, is the tool good or bad? It's really, as engineers, do we know what to ask for? Do we have the ability to judge the output without impacting the quality? Because we cannot just take everything that comes out of it and put into stuff that we ship. So we need to be able to judge what's coming out and be good for it. We need to have good experience with Gen AI. We just spoke of prompting. It's the core of the whole thing, human inputs. So we need skills and knowledge to write effective prompts, but also to learn to use the tools. And most importantly, know when it's a distraction. if it's not working, and if you just stay in, I'm going to make GitHub Copilot work for me for this problem, and I'm not giving up until it's done, you're getting into a distraction, and then you are not productive. So also know when to give up and probably take a step back and do something else and then go back to it. That's very important. And the nature of the problem at hand, like with most Gen AI stuff, if the problems that are well-defined, well-known in the market, out in the open, they are very good with it. But if it's very complex, you're likely to get less productivity gains. So it's also about when to use the tool and for what to use it for. And as with everything, there is also beware of dangers of over-reliance. So yeah, don't lose touch with the underlying mechanics if you're trying to get Copilot to do all the work. That's always a danger. Relying too much, so our skills as developers just might get rusty because we're kind of leaning on it. Contextual misunderstandings. Copilot is not always right. It's a very key thing to keep in mind. It cannot always grasp the broader context, so it can lead to off-mark suggestions. There can also be flaw propagations, because if you have bad context, bad code that it's trying to refer and replicate for you, you get bad output. So yes. Yeah, security and IP, we kind of touched on it, but it was not so clear earlier. It's still like VS Code only have the capability as of this moment. So we still need to be mindful if you are in other IDs and others. What about IPs? Are we getting vulnerable code back in or whatever? So like we said, the Limerick thing was a good example, right? They cannot plug every little leak in the pipeline. Ability to handle complex problems, I think, niche integrate issues. Trust your expertise when it comes to that. Not Copilot, it's still your Copilot. And last but not the least with AI is consistency challenges. So there could be bias and environment concerns, right? So AI can have biases. The environment, there could be consistency challenges. Different developers might get varying suggestions and they end up doing different things. So it's also very important that we try to also get consistency. So yeah, so while we need to be beware of things, there are also some guiding principles that can help us get over these. So what I say is always set the rules. So have a clear Copilot usage guideline. So define the when, the how, and the why. So when to do that. There should be a culture of sharing knowledge. So share experiences with your co-developers, because that will also help them avert those problems that you've seen. Uniformity is key. So coding standards should remain constant. That's always the goal, right? We want to see standards. So that should remain. We should keep abreast with text trends. We should adapt standards as required. So again, not be very rigid, because Copilot is probably, to your question, it's still trained with older data, but sometimes it's even trained on newer stuff that you might also find. So it's not always that it's that. Code reviews should be, it's not a replacement, right? So, but what is important is spot Copilot-induced errors early, or even when you're doing reviews, have transparency for Copilot usage. What I do with my team is generally what we have been following now is generally if we are using Copiloting, we use our comments to always also kind of point out this was with Copilot. So during review, we are actually now putting a bit more effort on looking what's being generated with Copilot. It takes us a bit more time, but it's also helping us build the trust, because as we see more and more that things are going through, it works better for us. Safety first, of course, proper guardrails and all of that. Key takeaways to kind of wrap it up. GitHub Copilot is probabilistic and it's not deterministic. So its language models are just sophisticated probability machines as with other LLMs. So you even might not get the same results for the exact same prompts every time. So it will differ. And it will be right a lot of times, and it will be wrong as well. So that's something to keep in mind. It's a Copilot, so we are, as developers, are still the pilots. We are still in control. We are the creative directors. We decide if the suggestions make sense, if we will use it or not, and if we make it a part of our code. Copilot is just there to help us. And it is not, oh, sorry, what happened there? I'll just do this. Yeah, so it's not designed to replace code review or any pull request or other important practices. Our DevOps practices, they remain as is. This is just another tool that sits in our IDE to help us with the process before it. So all the IP checks, quality scans, security scans that currently in our DevOps pipeline, they should remain. They shouldn't be replaced. And yeah, jump in and start using GitHub Copilot. What I always end up my talk with is, because I got this question a lot, I mean, at the beginning of this year when I started doing these talks, it's like, yeah, but then is GitHub Copilot going to do everything for us? What I always say is, yeah, GitHub Copilot is like a calculator. So using a calculator doesn't mean that we are not capable of doing complex calculations. It's just a means to do something right and faster. GitHub Copilot is just that extra tool in our toolkit for developing softwares more efficiently. So with that, thank you so much for your attention. And yeah, always remember, we as developers, we are the creative directors. We have the creativity. Copilot is never replacing developers. Thank you.